Here we are back at it. And again, thank you for joining me for this video. Last video, we got these all ground. We put the bevels into them. Now, we basically just have to finish it up. That easy. So from here, we're going to go to hand sanding and then going to get the scales made up and get those profiled the shape we want. And from there, we're going to etch the Damascus and then glue up the handles and all the finish work. But a lot of people ask me how I keep the Damascus pattern on the tang after I have put the scales on and stuff. So I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on that. There are a couple ways to do it. So I'm going to take these over and get going on the hand sanding. I'm going to start with the 150. So I'm thinking that I have plenty of videos out there showing hand sanding, and since it's not very exciting anyway, we're just gonna skip all this and I'll come back when I have all these blades done, if that's okay with you. Here we are, 4 knives hand sanded up to, I went to 400 on these. Sometimes I go up to 600. But I'm going to be doing some buffing in between my ferric dips. So 400 was good. Next step is handle material. So we are doing white G10 with copper pins. A nice elegant look. So what I'm going to do is cut out all my handle shapes and fit them on here, grind the profile so they're even with the knife, and then we're going to work on the bolster area. Then after that I can put my mark on here, and then we can dip these in the ferric to get our Damascus pattern to pull out. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't get these mixed up anyway, but just make it easy on myself and write what they are. So we've got all these handles profiled, and the bolster is sanded up to 1000 grit and buffed, and we're pretty much ready to do the etch. I have to do my maker's mark first, and then we can etch these. But I went through here. One thing you definitely want to do when you're doing these knives is to knock off the edges on this ricasso area, because when people are holding the knife like this, if you haven't knocked off the edge in here, it's just going to dig into their finger. So it's a really good idea to just basically go in the small wheel and run it. You know, if this is a small wheel, just run it at an angle so it knocks off that edge. It makes it a lot more comfortable for people. And then the same thing with the back of the spine here. Just knock off the edge, you know, in case people want to press on the back or whatever. We don't know how people hold their knives or really use their knives, so just kind of make them comfortable for all situations. So what I did is I went up to 400 grit on the tang, because what I'll do is when I etch this, I'm going to attach the handle after I've etched it. And that way, when I'm shaping the handle, I don't really need to touch the tang until I've hit 600 grit. And then at that point, the 600 grit really isn't aggressive enough to wash away the etch. So that's how you keep the etch in the tang, and I will be showing you that when I get to that point. All right, here we are. We are ready for the fun part, I guess. So up to this point, what I've done is I've hand sanded up to 400, and I've knocked the edges off of the ricasso so it'll be comfortable to the user on all these. I just kind of 45-degree angle on the small wheel and, you know, ran it across at 400. And then I have cut all the handle material so that it's profiled perfectly with the shape of the tang, and sanded up to 400. And the ricasso area has been sanded up to 1000 and polished. And the reason why we do all this is because when we etch this, we're gonna etch it in ferric and then etch it in the coffee. We just don't want to touch this anymore. So once we etch it, this is done, and the only thing we have left to do is shape the handle. So when you have the etching all done, and because it's up to 400, we don't have to touch the tang again with any abrasive that's under like 600 grit. And 600 isn't abrasive enough to wash out the etch. So that way we'll be able to keep the etch in the tang, which should always be the goal when you're doing Damascus. Okay, so before we get into this, because I know everybody loves a pattern reveal, I'm just going to throw this in the ferric really quick so we can see what the pattern is going to look like. And we kind of already know what it looks like just because of after the quench, it left the pattern on there. So you can see here we've got a nice bold random pattern on there. Should look pretty good. So we've got all the blades in the ferric, and we're going to leave these in here for 15 minutes. When they're done, going to pull them out and scrub them with 4/0 steel wool, and then we're going to put them on the buffer and we're going to buff them out. What the buffer does is we're going to try to smooth out the edges of the etch. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes. So all these should have some etch. And so we're going to pull them out of here. Going to get our 4/0 steel wool, spray them with some Windex, and then just scrub them down to get all the black off of there. So after you get these all scrubbed down, you got to come over here to the buffer, and you can really use any compound you want. I'm using black because it's just the most coarse compound. So green isn't a bad option either. So just always remember that the buffer is not a tool to get lax with. It's a dangerous tool. Can cause serious injuries, so just make sure you're careful with it. And also your steel will heat up quick on this thing, so you got to be careful about heat too. So after you have buffed these, we want to scrub them again to get the buffing compound off of here so that we can get the next etch, so that the ferric will actually get in contact with the steel. So I need to make a little bit of a correction here. So for some reason I was hanging these on my little hanger as though I was doing a hidden tang. And I need to dunk this whole tang in the ferric. So I got some wire, trusty baling wire, so that I can put the wire in my pinhole and then hang this on here all the way down into the ferric so that I can etch the tang. We all have those moments, right? And there we go. So what we're doing is we basically repeat this process as many times as we need to get the depth of etch that we want in the blade. For me, I usually do this 2 to 4 times just to get that depth. You can always leave it in longer than 15 minutes, but then you run the risk of just etching it too deeply and ruining the blade. So I like to kind of do it in small amounts until I'm happy with the etch. I've got all these etched and buffed, and it feels fantastic. It's a perfect depth. The next step is the coffee etch to bring out the dark in the 1084. But before I do that, I want to run some 1500 grit across this just to polish up that 15N20. Give it a nice shine to it, because that coffee is not going to touch this 15N20. So before we put it in there, just want to give it a nice shine.